Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. Hopefully tonight, more especially. Let's see. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. As always, love interacting with you live if you can make it. So if you can, join us Thursday nights on Facebook and YouTube. Love to see you over there. Let's see. You know me. My name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And next up, we have, for his introduction, Joe Martinez. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Internet world. This is Joe Martinez. Waiting for my name. I never time it right. It always comes way later. But yeah, Joe Martinez, Pisces. Love talking about politics. So, well, who am I? Master of Manasseh Lodge number 182. Member of a whole bunch of other things. And yeah, let's get political within the craft.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. When I think politics, I also think of our next guest, Jason Richards. Hello and good evening.
Joe's name always comes later. Like
It does.
your other things. I've got my hair. Hey everybody, Jason Richards, past master of a lodge in Virginia, members of Academic Lodge in DC, and my family lodge up in Zanesville, Ohio.
A lodge
Excellent.
in Virginia. That's
A
zingy.
Lodge.
A lodge. I like that.
And next
Of the
up,
Holy Saints show.
yes. Last but not least, Robert Johnson. Hello and good evening.
Hey guys, Robert Johnson, past master Waukegan 78 in Waukegan, Illinois, and current sitting secretary at Space Novum Lodge 1183, the premier education lodge in the great jurisdiction of Illinois.
Woo! I got a woo in before Joe. Nice.
I will outwoo you, my
You
friend.
probably will.
I'm going to need sense to back up that claim.
Yes. Let's see. Before we get into tonight's topic, I want to give a special shout out to the patrons. You guys are awesome. Thank you for supporting the show for many years. So if you want to join in on some of the great discussion we've had about the Grand Lodge of Louisiana this week, head on over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable and chip in a few bucks. Keep the show going for many years to come and join our little fun insider group where you can see behind the scenes and watch real-time live streaming of the next time Jason cuts his hair.
Also, it bears mentioning that we should probably say in many elements of our lives, we give up a little bit of things to support things that we love that also trigger us. And this will be no different.
Yes. Right, because if
Oh,
you're not
drink to that, my friends.
if you're not outside your comfort zone, you're not growing. Is that it? Is that how it goes?
Something, a rabbi told a story about a lobster. Yeah.
Discomfort builds character.
Well said. All right. Speaking of discomfort, let's get to some good topics tonight. Recently, we've had a discussion on politics and religion in the craft, and yet that conversation was focused on why do we or should we ban the discussing about politics and religion within the confines of the fraternity. But yet now we're going to take a different spin on this, and we're going to talk about politics within the craft. So not just
why does it happen anyway?
We're going to talk about
and who are the biggest offenders.
Sigh.
Right. So
Well,
we're not talking about
names.
We're not talking about running for political office.
Yeah.
We're talking about running for Masonic offices, of which there are many, in which they are a necessary evil to the administration of our fine fraternity. And yet, as with any human being, once a vying for an office becomes a goal, then the next thing you know, politics start to happen. And so Tonight, we're going to talk about a variety of different bodies, appendant bodies, things we've seen, things that have been discussed to figure out what's this all about? Why are we trying to, how do we make sense of a fraternity that is supposed to be equal, on the level? Jason, what do they say about Masons and being on the level?
I was going to go with ecumenical, but
there's so many of them, something along those
Masons
lines.
were all on the level. That's why we have so many of them.
That's right. But you can't be on the level if you're sitting in the East. So, just saying, there you have to be somewhat at a different station in life.
Ew.
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah. Right, Joe?
No, I disagree. I've never in my almost 17 years as a Freemason, I've never seen politics creep into our gentle craft
Almost a
ever
spit take there.
in my life. No.
Okay.
And that's the show. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night.
Nothing to discuss. We know that's true. So look, let's take all of the tenets of our fraternity off of it for a second, and realize that to pay the bills, to run your Blue Lodge, to run your Grand Lodge, to run your appendant body, there needs to be people in a position to handle to have the authority to handle the budget, the schedule, the administration of the craft. And so with that comes responsibilities, and with that comes a certain type of people who like to lead, who like to get into those positions, mostly for noble intentions, but yet there can be a time where it doesn't end up that way. So just to kind of set the stage, what do you think sets up Masonry for this grab of politicking sometimes? Like where does this come from, where we start to have this push and pull of personalities for office?
Well, you asked two different questions, so let me attack the first one and be a little serious for a second. I know that's a rare thing, but I think that we just have to realize that there's really two components to our gentle craft, right? We have the actual purpose, which is to make Masons, to take candidates through an initiatic experience and an experiential journey and all that stuff. But then we have the other bits of it, as John was talking about, where we have to pay the bills and keep the lights on and make sure we file for our taxes and that kind of thing. I don't think there's anything inherently Masonic about any of that crap. You know what I mean? It's not, that's just running a business, quote unquote, but to answer your first question, the politicking for me is really interesting, because I would say that a lot of the people that go through the line are not prepared or fit to run an organization that has money and has to pay bills and things like that.
In general,
so
you would say that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I have to break it up into two different
Mm-hmm.
things, right? We have the let's initiate people,
and in particular.
Yes, in general,
I mean,
and in particular.
So when we and I know it's
Good
weird
one,
for me to
Jason.
say sitting in the East, but you basically have two different roles in a Masonic lodge. You have the doing the candidate work, doing the real stuff, but then you also have that administrivia, which not everybody's suited for, I'm sorry to say. And I think we've seen many examples of it just going to pot, because you have people that are not good administrators, that are not good organizers, that don't know what a budget is, can't pay bills, and don't know how to lead and direct people. And I'm sorry, nothing in Masonry prepares you for any of that.
And that last point is so critical, Joe. There are people who vie for those positions of authority because in a lot of lodges it's just what you do. You spend your time, you serve your time. You have people who vie for that authority who just don't have the skill set to lead others. And some of that can be learned, and some of it can't.
I mean, I would always argue, I've been in, and everything I'm going to talk about now is sans the experience of being master of a lodge, because I've only been doing that crap for 4 months. So, but being in the military and working in the private sector for a very long time, I would always say that those skills can be cultivated across a different range of people, right? Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and we all, especially in a leadership role, you utilize your strengths and you rely on the people around you to augment your weaknesses, right? Or to, maybe not augment them so much. That probably came out wrong, but to, to fill in where you have those gaps
Right.
in your roles. And to your point, Jason, you don't see that when people get in the East, right? If guy gets in the East and it's like, hey, you're out on your own, bro. And we're just going to yell and holler and whine and complain and moan. But yeah, but back to my point, nothing in the
And that's
3
just the
degrees.
past masters.
Hey.
Man, shut up. But I mean, it's the truth though. Nothing in the degrees, nor should it, teaches you how to lead others and move towards a particular goal or mission. It just doesn't. But yet we keep electing these people.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about just leadership in general, and even Kentucky Brad says just because you can manage doesn't mean you can lead, right? So,
Ding ding.
so for those people in that
Kentucky
position,
Brad speaking from experience.
yes,
there.
yes, personal experience. The again, just because you are in the office, you're elected, you've got the trust of your brethren, you're now in that office, doesn't make you a good leader by default, right? And so that's what Joe was saying. It really comes to having some introspection about your abilities, to maintain the administration, as well as the ritual, as well as any other stuff that gets thrown at you. Yep. So Robert, what do you think about? Do you think that leadership is born, or is it something that you can train, or both?
Oof. I think you can learn it. I think you can learn. You can definitely learn it, and I think um, the line, like if you get in line, there certainly is and has been an ability for an officer to go through the line from junior officer to the senior officer, whatever, however many years, right? Like I say this because that was me. That was my experience. I was taught how to converse, how to talk to people. Like the lodge really did. Like I listened and I learned from some great guys and some not so great guys by looking and watching and listening, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't. But it takes a lot of introspection to do this work if you're going to take that on. So, of course, I think it's possible to learn leadership. And by the time I reached the worshipful master chair, I was in my second year as a district education officer. So my leadership skills had been seen at that point also. And after that, I went into a DDGM role. And so I was really good at that also. But that all comes from servant leadership, which, you can kind of tie into.
That was the word of the day right there.
Bam!
Phrase of the day.
So, and we're all going to agree on this point. It's this idea that regardless of your political promises or your ideologies or whatever you have, the idea comes back that you're supposed to serve, not be served. And I think a lot of times guys go through and they have a chip on their shoulder. They feel that because they've served in the line, they deserve a spot at the top.
Entitlement.
And that, yeah, this is a great point, right? The we'll call it entitlement politics or politic entitlement, yeah, something like that. There's just this unfortunate thing, and as you said, John, we could talk about leadership all night. It's probably a different show, right? When we talk about progressive lines, and I think we've probably talked about that ad nauseum in the past. But like those things kind of stink. But when we're talking about politics in a lodge, how often are we actually seeing politics? Because we're so scared of bringing outside world, quote unquote, politics into a lodge that we're afraid to kind of politic in the lodge and maybe say, hey, I'm not going to endorse Joe Martinez for master of the lodge. I don't like his attitude. He swears too much. I'm going
He
to
does.
endorse Jason. I'm
He
going to
does.
endorse Jason because, you know, he's much more even keeled and I like his education program and whatever else. Like,
Yeah.
but people have to know that there are aspirations for things, right? And nobody wants to even
I
ever put that out there.
I did
So,
have some really good education in 2017.
yeah, you did.
So there
Yeah,
you
you
go.
did. You had one of the most organized educational years of anybody I ever knew. And so that's the idea, I think, which is interesting in politics. This is maybe a flip side of what you wanted to ask, right? We don't want to, people are always like, oh, politics and lodge. No, I say politics,
Joe
like internal
disagrees.
politics, kind of yes, maybe a
Well,
little bit.
let's
We
open
should
up
have
the can
some,
of worms, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I know, like in many jurisdictions, not all, but some, like basically, it's if it's either explicitly shunned, it's certainly culturally shunned to not vie for an office, right? You want the office to call to you. You want You want your brethren to nominate you rather than you start asking around with vote for me. I like Ike buttons and all that, right? So, but should there be, right? Because we could obviously, and we will talk about the downside of politicking and masonry, but let's stay positive for a second, right? I think you hit the nail on the head there, RJ. There could be a case for the explicit. I think that Joe is doing a great job as master this year. I want to make sure that he stays in for the next year or for the next 10 years because he's doing such a good job. Assuming Joe complies.
No,
But
he will not comply.
fine, just ruin my example. Just please do
Fine.
that would be great. So, but you know where I'm going with this, right? That there should be it should not be a secret. I mean, the ballot should be secret, but it shouldn't be a secret about how you wish to serve your lodge and what the brethren expect from their leaders. That should not be a secret. Joe.
So, first off, I will not be serving for 10 years. So, thank you for that.
Had that on the record, but
Second, on the record, baby.
right after Jason finishes volunteering at the George Washington National Masonic Memorial.
Tour guide, baby.
I was
just
gonna
got an
make
email.
that joke.
I got an email. $19 an hour, baby.
Woo!
That's all you, man. Woo!
$19 an hour, really?
Yeah, really. And you get a 30-minute lunch break. Anyway. So let's unpack that for a second there, John, because I think the reality is, and I guess I'm being the Debbie Downer of the group today when it comes to this, is outside of what Robert said, does our progressive line in most places truly set us up for that, right?
Absolutely
And
not.
exactly. So the answer is absolutely no, it doesn't, right? You have this system where the expectation is, unless you're a complete turd, you will move on to the next seat and the next seat and the next seat, and then you meet your Masonic qualifications regardless of what jurisdiction you're in, and you move up to the next seat and the next seat and the next seat. So it's now you have some lodges that don't do that, right? They've thrown out the concept of progressive lines. They're like, we're going to put the best person for the job in the seat, and we're not doing this moving up the chairs thing. Some observant lodges have that practice, right? So there's two schools of thought on that. I mean, you have Robert's point, which is a very valid point of, hey, I was lucky enough to have people that taught me stuff and I learned things along the way. But to be fair, how often does that really happen?
So I feel myself drawn back to the Grand Master's address that circulated this past week. What jurisdiction was that from?
Colorado, the one we posted.
Yes.
When we
Ooh, the
Yes.
video, yeah.
Colorado.
That was
And
fantastic.
one, if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Because it certainly serves my confirmation bias.
Yeah, Joe,
Two,
slam that in the chat.
I got it. It's in the chat.
Nice.
so two, something that the Grand Master of Colorado said that really resonated was, look, in Masonry, doing this whole 1 year in leadership thing, it doesn't hold parity with like tech industries and businesses where you have CEOs and strategic leaders, leading their respective organizations for 5, 10, sometimes 15 years at a time. And the thing that resonated with me about that was, that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get anything done and anything sustainable done, um, as a leader of a Masonic organization, because you come in, you spend the first couple months trying to get up to speed, and then try to do your best and manage all of your respective, and then by the time like you look at your watch, it's December, at least in Virginia, and it's
Right.
time to roll back over to the new person. Um, so I really do think there is something about having some continuity in the lodge leadership. You usually get that with the secretary and the treasurer, but
Sure.
why not, the senior warden or someone like that?
Look at Massachusetts. Their Grand Master is elected for 3 years,
Right.
or he's elected
Hmm.
for 3 one-year terms, whatever you want to,
Right. Pennsylvania too.
sticker you want to slap on it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're there for more than 1 year.
Illinois, we have 2-year terms for our Grand Master, but typically it's because he is elected each year and he gets 2 years. And I think that's like really the bare minimum to be able to effectively do anything. And to be quite honest, these other jurisdictions that change year to year, it's no wonder they are floundering all over the place in so many different areas, right? I mean, it's just like they're bleeding out.
Yeah, that's fair.
So here's where it would make sense. If the Grand Line are truly figureheads and they are kind of the public face of the fraternity, visiting the lodges, performing, charitable functions, things like that, then it makes sense to keep swapping people out year after year, provided that you have a committee or a body within the Grand Lodge, like a jurisprudence committee, that is actually empowered to run the organization.
Or maybe a strategic plan.
Get me a little choked up there.
Well, I mean, even then, you can have all the strategic plans you want. If the committee isn't empowered
If they're
to
going to act on it.
execute that
Mhm.
plan
Yep.
after the new guy comes in, then it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So how do you relate all this back to like we're really circling around this leadership topic, but I think there's this idea in the background that maybe we have an opportunity to connect to, which is like the politics again. How many times, like in the profane world, do we hear our leaders propose like strategic plans and things, and how often do they follow through?
Right. Execution's hard.
I'm just curious, like, do we have the ability to do that in Masonry? Do we see the same pitfalls in the profane politic world as we do in the Masonic world? And before anybody answers that, I think there's probably listeners out there who think there's no such things as lodge politics. And to those brothers, like, wake up.
You wrong.
Right.
But you
So,
wrong,
a fun phrase that I heard a lot a number of years ago is, no plan survives first contact with the adversary. Like, there has to be something said for pivoting. I think the problem we have is when we lay out a strategic plan and it encounters resistance and we just drop it all together.
Yeah, just give up.
Yeah.
Well, I think to go back to Robert's question, let's step outside the politics part of it and let's talk about ourselves as an organization, right? Can we put a long-term plan together, get buy-in from people that are going to span those chairs for more than 2 years, right? 3, 4, 5 years, and execute it? I mean, looking at it in the business world, you can, if those same people are in those same positions for a long extended period of time. The problem is that they're not, and it's exactly as you guys were talking about. It's everything gets reshuffled and recycled because very few lodges have a long-term plan.
So let me challenge that then. Okay, so in general, when peace and harmony, try to remain, that people serve their time, move on, and step out of the way for the next person. Because certainly 1 year is long enough if you are carrying the burden for your lodge, for example. However, that's not to say you can't get stuff done, given the constraints of the benevolent dictatorship that we set up in most jurisdictions, right? So there are ways to push things through, to push agendas through, when you have the right authorities. So this gets to the fun part of tonight's conversation. There are many, many recent examples, the least of which, being the, all of the stuff that was going on with the special conclave, leading up to the conclave of the Knights Templar organization, where an individual with a posse of supporters was able to ram some very controversial things through by edict, by cabal, and they were able to get a lot of stuff done, whether you agree with it or not. So it's not to say we've spent the first 20 minutes of this episode talking about how do you be a good leader, how do you balance this, how do you do strategic planning, but no. There are times where if you're dedicated to whatever cause you're trying to execute, you can absolutely do it. And so what are some examples that you've seen that in recent history where certainly that happened, that things got through, things that the true politicking of forcing, forcing's a bad word, you know what I mean.
It's not a bad word though. It is at the end of the day when you get to do things depending on which jurisdiction you're in, which body we're talking about, let's just make it a general statement. If you can push things through by edict, then
that's a good example.
Those things live for as long as people want to tolerate them. You know what I mean?
So for the non-Masons, right, we have our own laws, rules, and regulations. It's also good to be king, where the leader of most organizations can issue edicts that remain law until they are out of office. And so those edicts serve as actual law. They do not need to be approved by committee. They do not need to be voted on. They are fiat. They are, I'm going to say this is true, and it's going to be true forever. And that certainly
And if they're bad enough, they call a special conclave and kick you out.
Which is rare and amazing that happened in the first place, by the way. Because you need a large majority to overrule that kind of stuff. I mean, it's the whole checks and balances, but unlike, the U.S. political system, we do have, in most appendant bodies and jurisdictions, the ability to have rule by edict.
But it's so rarely executed, right? I mean, I remember reading Hodap's article. It was like, I don't remember the last time anybody called a special anything. So this is awesome, and then he gave us all the details about it. But
for overruling an edict, but edicts happen all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So this is the real politicking, the downside, the negative side of politicking by edict.
I think one thing that is interesting, right? Like, here's an interesting example of here in Illinois. We have a code that is known as, and I guess it's probably not really well known. And there is a cost for doing these kinds of edicts, because think about, maybe in most Grand Lodges, Grand Master gets a year. Cool. In Grand Lodge jurisdictions that get more than 1 year, there's a danger, especially if they're up for election each year that they serve. So here in Illinois, we have to elect him twice. I don't know about Massachusetts. If we have to elect him 3 times? But here's what I'm getting at. Do something unpopular that first year. Watch yourself not get reelected the second year. So we have something called 3B, which basically says Grand Master at any time can use, it's like the A-bomb code.
Really?
I had these pins made that just had the square and compass, little button pins, and I wanted to hand them out at Grand Lodge that said 3B or die. And basically, the reason was I felt our per capita needed to get raised. We were at $10. $10, right? And so this was nothing. And in order to survive,
Per member.
my thinking is, look, the Grandmaster has a supreme opportunity and a reason and a reasonable expectation to preserve the craft. And you can make an argument that per capita can help that. So I was like, yeah, 3B per capita, increase it, and you don't have to vote with the constituency. Now, of course, he didn't use that. Nobody's ever going to use that. Not in their right mind if they want to get reelected.
Because
Maybe in your
it's
second
an
year, though, right?
unpopular way of pushing things.
Do it your lame duck year. Exactly right. Yeah. But no, that's an interesting point. I think that's again, it's a rarity because a lot of the jurisdictions are single year. They're lame duck years, right? For a lot of our grand officers. So, for the one and doners, they can issue a whole bunch of edicts that will just live. And I think the consensus a lot of the time is, well, he'll be gone at the end of the year, or he'll be, he'll be replaced. So maybe he'll get overturned. Right. But I mean, I could think of another example. Let's talk about South Carolina. What happened to them last year? We had some edicts and some suspensions and some suspensions. I don't think there were expulsions, but everything that was going on there, which Brother Hodap also reported on quite well. But they did something rather awesome politics wise, which I'd never heard of in all of my jurisdictions. And, I join a lot of things, and which is all of the Grandmaster's edicts in South Carolina, folks. If you're on the chat, chime in and correct me if wrong. But at their grand communication, they have to actually vote on all of the Grandmaster's decisions for the year. And the body of the Grand Lodge can actually overturn things. And I think that's what happened with Most Worshipful Mike Smith. Who passed away a few months later. But they overturned his suspension and reinstated him. And then they did more things, but they overturned a lot of the Grandmaster's decisions, which again is, and that happened at their annual communication, which I've not seen before. And I don't think a lot of our jurisdictions have that. I mean, Robert, chime in if you think different. A lot of our jurisdictions have that ability to, at the end of the year, take stock of what a Grandmaster's done and say, we don't like this, we're going to overturn it. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, that was something that was pretty surprising. And to be honest with you, is a form of accountability to your constituents. I mean, I think that's great. If you want to be a benevolent dictatorship, but the people should still have an ability to 2/3 overrule you.
Right. The checks and balances.
Exactly. And this is where, rules, so leading up to this episode, I was just fired up. Like, oh man, I can't wait to talk about cronyism, BS, and all this stuff.
Let's do it.
Well, but it bears mentioning too that like there are these great parts of the political system that we have adopted that work. And of course, politics necessarily has loopholes and things as well that make it so that sometimes things can't work.
So that's a really good point, because whether or not your jurisdiction or your grand body has the right loopholes in place, there are plenty of lawyers, Masonic lawyers, right, that they can dig through the code, they can find the wording, the verbiage, the clauses, the exemptions to really get around a lot of different things. It just takes some time and patience and someone who's really familiar with their code. But again, if you're a Mason in any jurisdiction, you have access to your Masonic law that you're supposed to be adhering to within that jurisdiction. So there's no reason you couldn't just dust that off and try to find ways to mitigate risky issues, or now I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, if you really wanted to be malicious in the kindest way possible, yeah, you could certainly execute just about anything in a very political way if you really know your code. Do you agree?
I don't agree, because I'm of the mindset that if I don't like things, I just yell really loud and then they go away. And it works for me.
It works for you.
It does. It really does. I can just yell and I stamp my feet and then those things go away.
But I could see a case for, say, a more introverted person that could
I
play
am
the game,
introverted.
right?
I'm
You know,
introverted.
let's just look at the slimy politicians on the outside of the fraternity, right? That they say one thing when they're running for for office, and then once they get in, they do the opposite, right? There's nothing preventing any Mason who's advancing through the officer chairs to do exactly the same thing, right? Toe the cultural line, toe the brotherhood line, and then
Yeah.
once they're in, they have that authority to make whatever changes they want,
Let me paint this little scenario.
right?
On the outside, our politicians spend, I don't even, what is it? It's almost like 3/4 of the year preparing for the election season,
Right.
and the last quarter with the election. Like the amount of time they actually spend politicking
their
is
jobs?
crazy. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now think about this. In the fraternity, we do have politics within the fraternity, but we can't politic. So like, how you doing that? How you doing that? You know how you're doing that? You're donating to charities. Big money donations equals big money titles. I've heard this.
That's one way. Yeah, you could buy your 33rd degree if you
I've
give enough
heard that
to charity.
too. I've heard this. I don't know. I can't speak to it, but I have heard.
Right. And
Mark
just
March 31st, 2022, the day John realized who will be a black cat for eternity.
right.
I'm right there with you.
Yes.
And that's okay.
And just
The only way to win is not to play the game.
is not to play. Well, and you also made me think of another thing too. If you can't buy your way in, how do real political meetings happen? They don't happen in the meeting, right? They happen
the bar,
outside
buddy.
the meeting, at the bar, at the social
In the
hall,
bathroom.
in the bathroom, whatever it
Well-
takes to on the golf course,
In
right?
the cigar lounge.
In the cigar
Yeah.
lounge. That's when you
Go-
really get your job done, your actions executed.
I mean, go back for a second though, and going back to the politics and the dirty politics, which happens everywhere, right? You said you can't buy your way into things. I mean, that's kind of not true. If we're looking at like profane politics, I mean, what do you hear on election night? The first big thing you hear is, number one, how many votes people are getting, but number two, how much they've spent on the election. And more oftentimes than not, the person who spends more money is the one who wins. I mean, that's just the reality.
Except for
So,
Bloomberg. He couldn't do it.
yeah, nobody likes Bloomberg. And I'm from New York, so
Tax sodas. Tax the sodies.
Oh.
but cronyism, that's a word.
Ooh, cronyism, meaning that you give your friends and or relatives personal favors,
Or your groups of guys that you sit next to, those
Mhm.
two.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's around.
So
that
yeah.
exists.
So do you think anyone's ever nominated someone purely because they're a friend and not because
Almost exclusively,
the
John.
best man for
Almost
the job?
exclusively.
No, they're all the best man
So-
for the job.
So, how about, I know no one has ever experienced this. How about that election night when you suddenly see 20 members of your lodge come in who haven't been to lodge in 10 years?
Where do they come from?
You're like, hey, what are you doing here? Yeah, not speaking from experience at all there.
No, or the ones that show up on balloting night that you've never met before. That you actually have to have them pull out their dues card because you have no idea who the hell they are. And lo and behold, they're a member of your lodge. Those are fun.
They're gonna
Or the night
exercise
you're
that
having
vote.
that discussion to raise the dues.
Yes, dues will always get out the vote.
I
That's
say
true.
you should just have a vote on dues every month. That way you get
Every
the
month.
largest
You-
amount of people.
That's
Pump those
true.
numbers up. Pump those
I lo-
numbers up.
There you go. That's the secret to
numbers.
growing
Man,
attendance.
how do worshipful get so many people engaged?
Mm-hmm. So
Or
like
you say,
you
"Oh,
all
we're going to
mentioned
table it for next month," and then you just keep doing that for the rest of the
No, hell
year
no. You just raise the dues 12 months in a row, and then
by
you
like
end
a
up with this
nickel.
magic pot of money.
like we're raising the dues $1 every single month. Yeah, 12 whole dollars a year, 2 cups of coffee from the Bucks. But yeah, so cronyism, this idea that you're gonna take the East, right, and you're gonna appoint people, and so that doesn't happen so much, I think, in the main, down home lodges, because it's quote unquote just a lodge. But the second you have, let's say, um, at the year I served the Grand Lodge and the brothers as a DDGM, I picked a team. I was told by my assistant deputy grandmaster or my area deputy grandmaster that you don't have to do it all. Get a team. Get a team of guys to go out with you. Have a guy, an expert on this, an expert on that. So what did I do? Of course, I used cronyism. I'll be honest, right? I got my buddy Dave Greenberg to be my district auditor because he was like a financial whiz. I had several guys, communication guys and my education guys. And what is Dave doing today? Dave Greenberg is my DDGM of the First Northeastern District. He took over. So cronyism kind of happens. But in that instance, like I utilized it, but I also thought he was the best person for the job. And I just happened to know him.
Yeah. Well, and I'm inspired by like Abraham Lincoln, right, who brought in members for his cabinet that were his opposition when he was running, right? He wanted a different opinion, right? He did not want yes men. He wanted people of sometimes completely opposite opinion to be part of the leadership team, so that way we can make balanced and well-informed decisions. I mean, that's the way you really should get stuff done, and that way it does create harmony for the lodge. If it's not, that's a way to balance out the cronyism that could happen, is to actually try to actively seek out, if you're a good leader, if you're a servant leader, right, seek out what's best for the lodge and not for your agenda. But here we are.
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head there and you've mentioned the whole peace and harmony bit a couple of times, and all I keep thinking back to, going back to the conversation about leadership, is harmony in a lodge is not every single person, wearing the same colored tie and, exactly agreeing with one another. It's being able to have those tough discussions and come to a consensus that you can all move forward together. That's harmony. Harmony is not, oh yeah, we're just not going to do nothing. Which is what a lot of lodges think harmony is
Right.
in order
I'm
to
not
keep
gonna.
people happy,
Yeah.
let's do nothing. Right.
Right.
Well, and
Exactly.
harmony doesn't mean every single person in the entire lodge is all in agreement on the way forward.
Yeah. What's there's a saying that says like, death by committee, the idea that if 100 people get together and decide on what color something's going to be, it's going to be beige. Like you need somebody who's going to pick red.
Like that red hat of yours.
That's right. Wait,
Masonic Revival.
like that. There it is. Boom, boom. I don't know which way to go with these cameras. They're weird. Yeah, Masonic Revival. They got some great stuff.
Woo!
When you talked about opposition, like the first thing that came to my mind in terms of with like Abe Lincoln was Thaddeus Stevens. Dude, 2 huge GOP leaders, similar ideas, and very strained relationship, different ways of getting there. But like, I just think if I were in a position of absolute power, I would totally want somebody to be like, I'll be the Thaddeus Stevens to somebody's Abe Lincoln or vice
you need
versa.
an angel and a devil on your shoulder.
That's right.
It's the only way to grow. That's the only way to grow as a person, is by not living in an echo chamber.
So, okay, so if you want to be evil, then what do? You surround yourself. You build that team right? Because we talk about this to be a good leader and to get ready for your lodge as worshipful master. You need that team to support you in your decision making. Hopefully, then to carry some of those ideas into the next couple of years. What if you do staff it all up with like-minded yes people? I mean, you could certainly change the culture of the lodge pretty quickly, to be honest. I mean, it only takes a couple of years of leadership in a different direction than your lodge culture is used to for it to really decimate or grow the lodge. And I'm going to call it, like, Joe, I am fascinated with what you and your team have been able to do with your lodge in the past 4 or 5 years. I have watched from afar the things that you've done, and I'll say it for what it is. I know there are some things that you've been putting in place in the previous years to help you make your sitting in the East a lot easier. I've noticed it. You've been very smooth about it, but it's paying off dividends. And you see me, bring not only me but my family to more of your lodge events, and it's been a long game, but I definitely commend you for setting up those chess pieces in the right way that it's really starting to pay off now. So,
Well, I am touched and honored. Thank you.
a
And
woo to you, sir.
well, woos galore, man. Woo squared everywhere, baby. Woo.
Woo.
So talk about that though. So much of the politics, like
But it
we
was
talk about,
politics. That's the thing, Robert. It
yeah,
was politics. As there's
Yes.
yeah.
no nice way to say it. It really was politics. And sure, I think that yeah. I mean, I'm happy to say it. It absolutely is politicking, but it's not. I don't think anything that we've done as a group over the last 4 or 5 years has been, I would consider it cronyism, right? Because you're not, the big thing I would have to say that's different than your typical cronyism is, like, hey, I'm going to move you up with me because, I know you're a yes man and, you're going to do whatever I say and blah, blah, blah. It's been a small group of people that show up all the time, number one, that actually give a crap, number two, and have the same vision of what masonry is. And it just so happened to be the same one that I had. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was a very good combination to have that. There's no nice way to say it. That strategic plan that outlives the guy before me and the guy after me, because we've kind of put the lodge on this road, and we've decided this is the way that we're going to operate in masonry land here in this lodge. And it's going to outlive me. I don't know if it'll outlive me in 10 years, but it'll definitely outlive me next year and the year after, because we all want the same thing, and it's great to have that, on both sides, the people that came before you and the people that came after you. Because the guys that came before me, guess what? They're still showing up and they're still contributing, and they have not stopped coming to things. You know what I mean? Because they were like, hey, I helped build this and this is amazing and I'm going to keep doing it. But we've got guys who were past masters 4 or 5 years ago and they're still showing up every week, because it was their baby and it was our baby and we helped build it together. So yeah, I mean, that's the only way to do it. And it sounds like such a dirty, gross word, but you have to politic with those around you.
Well, so
Benevolent
in
politics.
that's the key, right? Like when we talked about how to win friends and influence people,
Right.
when people read that book, they think, "What are you, human hacking? This sounds terrible." Like you're just going to go out there and tell people this, that, and the other, and to get them on your side. No, I actually care.
Right.
I actually give a crap.
Yeah, that was.
And
Can we?
I'm going to normalize it.
Yeah.
I'm going to care. And then they're going to care. And then they're going to bring their ideas, which is awesome. And we're going to implement the crap out of it. Right? I mean, that's what it's
Can
about.
can we just talk for a second about the transformational power of empathy? I mean, the fact that you as a leader truly care about your organization, about the people in it, that is, in my estimation, the single most impactful way to affect organizational change.
Yeah. I love it.
Just care.
And I'm replaying all these long-term strategic successes in my head, and you're right, Jason. Like they all come back to empathy. Uh, the first one that came to mind was chartering. The Patriot Lodge, first lodge chartered in over 30 years, and it was right next door to an existing lodge, and so everyone's like, "What do you mean you're trying to be an academic lodge? What, you're going to steal membership from?" Your neighboring lodge, and so there had to be a long game of empathy to listen, to respond, to meet in the middle, to collaborate. Otherwise, that lodge would have never gotten off the ground. It would have never gotten the approval of the district. And to that point, a little bit more backstory of the chartering of the Patriot Lodge. We didn't have to ask permission, but we went around to every lodge in the district that we would be inserted into, and we made sure that there was a voice vote taken at every lodge in the district to make sure that they were comfortable with the founding of a new lodge in their district. Didn't have to do it, and if the vote was negative, we probably we could have done it anyway. But at least we were there to show we cared. We're trying to be model Masons as a new lodge in the district, and it's paid off. So I think that's an
Totally.
interesting empathy. I love that empathy.
There's this idea like there's a lot of lodges that kind of start up and they're like, oh, we're going to be these TO lodges. We're going to do this, that, and the other. And it's awesome, right? And in the states where you cannot be a TO lodge, maybe you have kind of like an observant style lodge or whatever. And it requires some finesse and some politicking to get those things rolling and to do them. But what's really interesting is the lodges that I have seen form around this way in not just Illinois, but in surrounding areas have had some run-in with Grand Lodges. And I'll tell you why. Because we're so caught up with being kind of like pompous education that we disregard like the other things that beige masonry is really enthused about. So like, what does it cost to throw a couple $100 from your awesome, huge treasury that you have because we're a TO lodge or whatever, and we've got thousands of dollars because our members pay tons of dues? What's it cost to throw $200 to a Grand Lodge charity? Is that politics? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it also ensures that the Grand Lodge says, I don't mind those guys. Right?
Yeah.
What was that Family Guy episode? They're like, oh, that's that hard teacher. He's a jerk. And they're like, that teacher donates his whole paycheck to charity. Right? It's part of it's like a game and it's not, right? It's genuine caring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think this is really up to the last, the final question of the night, which is politicking or politics within the fraternity a necessary evil in order to grow and to sustain the goals of your lodge, your appendant body, and beyond? Joe, what do you think?
Thank you for letting me go before RJ. That makes my night every time you do that.
Woo!
So thank you. I would say, woo! I would say, unfortunately, yes, it is necessary as long as we have this beautiful allegorical system of degrees that are meant to impart these really amazing lessons about life and truth, but they're wrapped within a rent-paying, charity-giving, social construct that we understand Freemasonry to be. There's going to be the required aspect of politics in it. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Just like when we were talking about harmony. Harmony doesn't mean that everybody agrees. Harmony means that you talk it out on the one level, not the many that Jason talks about, and come to a consensus and walk away hopefully learning a little bit more than you did before, not just about the situation, but about the people that are around you. But I mean, this really all revolves around, the politics and the cronyism and the drama and the issues. It all revolves around forgetting the whole purpose of why you were there in the first place, right? It was to be initiated, and it was to have this experience with a whole bunch of other people that you will eventually call brother, that you genuinely and truly love. And if all the stuff I'm saying sounds weird to you, then maybe you need to do it over again, because that's the purpose and that's the goal. And yeah, I mean, that's a good place to drop the mic. So love y'all. Stay out of politics and woo.
And woo. All right, Jason. What's the role of politicking in Freemasonry?
Ultimately, when you look at trying to pivot the fraternity or move the organization forward, it's best to do so with buy-in. Otherwise, Masonic leadership and the turnover you have will make it difficult, if not impossible, to sustain any sort of evolution or transition, whatever you're trying to do. And so, in a lot of ways, politicking and obtaining buy-in of the brethren around you, your constituents in your lodge, if you're the master, constituents of the Grand Lodge membership, if you're in the Grand Line, I think politicking and obtaining buy-in share a lot of the same tactics, but obtaining buy-in has the inclusion of empathy to the point where you have an idea of what you want to do, but you truly want to do what's best for the brethren, and you're truly interested in hearing their feedback and their response. And so I think politicking with empathy is absolutely critical to ensuring the continuation of the organization. Politicking without empathy or even with malicious intent is cancerous, that will eat away the organization.
Mic drop. Number 2. Awesome. Thanks, Jason. I love it. How about you, Robert?
I think politics in the organization is necessary only because within any sort of thing that has a governing body, it becomes I mean, it's not like we set out to politic. It's that we set out to write the course and to do so, hopefully, in benevolent ways, which tends to bring together people of a common purpose. If you want to throw a political term, look at like a political action group or a committee to come together on a caucus, to come together on a common purpose. And we do that. And necessarily we have then created the anti-heroes or the antithesis to whatever we're trying to do. And there become sides. And this is the basis of these kind of political divides. Somebody in the chat wrote that politics is Greek for people in place or something along those lines. That's precisely correct. If we think about it in that way, politics will be a part of everything that happens. I mean, politics happen in your home when you and your wife or your significant other are attempting to discover what you would like for dinner. I mean, especially if you have kids, you got the pizza party and you got, we want Italian beefs from Portillo's or whatever the case is. Now I'm hungry again. But the point being, it's a necessary thing that happens within a fraternity. We should be guided by our tenets, the things that we espouse to be. And if we're guided by those things, hopefully those politics that take place happen in a way that is always resulting in peaceful transfers of power and always resulting in the common good. And as Jason pointed out, nowhere in politics do we see empathy employed, perhaps more than it should be, than in Freemasonry. Freemasonry essentially teaches us maybe one of the biggest lessons of all is essentially empathy. Intrinsic empathy for all of your brothers and to the public. So it's going to be I don't consider it a necessary evil. I consider it a necessary element. But I don't know. You want to quote Uncle Ben, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I had to give Nick Johnson his Marvel moment or whatever. So
I missed
there
those.
you go.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks, Robert. Yeah, at the end of the day, know your code, right? So know how to get things done, because there are going to be times where you're going to have to call a special conclave. There are going to be times where you're going to have to know how to navigate the messy middle that comes with change. And so, yeah, I'm going to double down on everything Jason and Robert have said on empathy, but realize that do benevolent politicking, right? So understand that you're not going to get everything you ask for, right? You're not going to get everything that your side wants, and so the best way to do it is not to rule by edict, but rule by love. So with that, thank you all very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.